All right. Hello, students. My name is Lillian Sims. I am here today with Dr. Laura Pinault, the program director for UK's Anesthesia residency. I'm so excited to have Dr. Pinault here. Dr. Pinault, a lot of our M1 and M2 students may not have met you yet. Is there anything you'd like to share for those that don't know you yet?
Sure. As Lillian said, I am the program director for anesthesiology residency program here at UK, which is a 4-year categorical program that we offer. And we're a big program. We've had a lot of success, a lot of interest among our students in our specialty. And I'm happy to be here today to just talk a little bit about the perspective of applying to residency and specifically how we look at research and quality improvement projects.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. As we've talked about before, a lot of times I'm talking to first or second year students. They're deciding about their first research engagement, and a lot of the feedback we hear, kind of at the national level, is there's no one size fits all answer. You can't speak for every specialty or every program. So, students, if you're watching this is Dr. Pernault's perspective as an expert here at UK in anesthesia, and of course. Things might be different in different specialties, but it's still really great kind of insider expertise from her perspective. So thanks for your time. I'm going to go through just a
Absolutely.
series of that I tend to get from a lot of students. I'm going to start really broad, Dr. Pinault, with just really big picture here. Thinking of a first or second year student, can you just share briefly what a program director is and any of the other roles that might be key to the application and evaluation process if students are really unfamiliar with that?
Sure. Every residency program has a program director, which is a faculty member who practices that specialty of medicine. Obviously, usually has been practicing for, some years and gone up the ladder in the educational leadership. Program director is really tasked with overseeing the entire curriculum and educational programming and platform for residents in that specialty. So, for example, for anesthesiology, I help build with my team of assistant program directors and other administrative folks curriculum in terms of didactics, preparation for the board exams, and then making sure our residency program is meeting all the requirements that are posted nationally for the specialty of anesthesiology, that our residents get the correct exposure or broad exposure to the different types of cases, complexities, all that stuff.
So no big deal, right? Minor role.
No big deal. Yeah, lots
All
of
right.
stuff. Yeah.
And again, thinking really broadly for our incoming students, at that application stage where you're evaluating candidates, what are some of the traits that you're looking for students to be able to convey, whether it be through research or other things, that you think would make them a good candidate? What's kind of the big picture they should be aiming for?
I think the big picture is you want to promote yourself in a positive way, and you have to look at it as sort of a promotional game in a way, right? Because it's a competitive process, and everyone wants to put their best foot forward. And what program directors are looking for is probably not that dissimilar among different programs, right? We're all, of course, looking for good, smart people that want to practice our field of medicine. And display enthusiasm and experience in that field, display that they've thought about their fit in that specialty and how their personality is going to, meld with in that working in that context, of course, and their skills and passions might align. And then, but beyond that, we also want just fundamentally good people with good character. So you also want to use your application as a platform to display your character traits that would be desirable in a workplace, right? You're a professional person. You're a good team player. You're a good communicator. You display the relevant skills that you learned in medical school well, and that shows on your application. All of us fundamentally want that because that's very important to your success in residency.
I appreciate hearing that. Sometimes we get caught up on the CV building and lose track of what's the big stuff that matters here for me to be successful in residency and beyond. Um,
Hmm.
one other kind of really broad question. Again, for students who don't know, what's a shelf exam, what's step two, that sort of thing, what are the categories of information you're going to see when students are applying? We're talking here about research. What are the other kinds of metrics that might be valued alongside research from your perspective?
Yeah, I think metrics that are strongly valued among all programs are, of course, at baseline or foundation is your academic profile, right? You want to be fundamentally a good student. You want to pass all your courses, do well on your tests, get good grades, whether it's pass fail or, A, B, C, D kind of grading. You want to aim for, honors or distinctions, awards when available. But just because you have them doesn't, or don't have them doesn't mean, it's the end of the world. Fundamentally, though, you still want to be a good student. You want to do well on your licensing exams too. So as a MD student, you'll take the USMLE Step 1, which is now pass fail, at the end of your, I think, M2 year, and then M3 4 year, you'll be taking USMLE Step 2, which has a percentile numerical score. And you want to, aim for a good score on that because it's one of the metrics people use as a marker of academic success, but it's not entirely predictive of everything. It's just one measurement in time. Beyond academic stuff, there are categories for you to put leadership opportunities, things that you've done longitudinally as a medical student. And ideally, you want to put things that you've done many times, not just one-time experiences. Longitudinal leadership, longitudinal community service. Um, you want to look at research and quality improvement projects and list out those things that you participated in and kind of you just like all your extracurricular activities that add to you as a professional and as a person, or maybe you're heavily invested in a certain type of hobby as well. Sometimes those things can come into play.
Okay, great. Now, narrowing down more just to research, what is it that you see on students' applications in terms of their research involvement? How are they able to share those kinds of things with you?
So in their applications through the ERS platform, there are tabs and categories where they can list out certain types of experiences, namely research or QI. And I believe those two categories are bundled together. And I will say this right from the start that I think both of them are important. I don't think research is necessarily always more important than quality improvement because both of them have some overlapping skills that you're displaying, right? So you can list out, and they have a certain amount of items you can put on a list and a certain amount of text, of course, for which you can describe your experience. But anything that you've been involved in as a medical student is likely a good thing and is going to pad your CV for any specialty. It varies, of course, specialty to specialty and what's looked at or what's required, but it's hard to say a hard and fast rule that you have to have a robust research project or not. But I would say if the opportunity is available, then you should go ahead and do it. Even if it's not in the specialty that you're necessarily going to be applying to, research experience, even outside those specialties, is highly valued by a lot of program directors, including myself.
Okay, that's great to know.
Yeah.
Um, One of the biggest worries is students see that in our MP data, the average number of research outcomes by specialty, those sort of broad metrics. And they ask, if the expectation is 7 outcomes and I have 5, will I get screened out? They're kind of aiming for just a minimum number or wondering if there's a minimum number. Or they're wondering, how do you differentiate maybe one first author paper versus 5 fifth author conference submissions? From your perspectives, are y'all able to kind of parse through and weigh differently things like first authorships or papers versus conferences? Or is there, how much weight should there be to that effort to kind of reach a minimum number of outcomes versus quantity over quality?
Hmm. I think quality matters more than quantity. And I don't think anyone should use those numbers as a basis to say, I have to get that number of publications or experiences, because that's just an average. And we certainly don't have any kind of minimum, or we don't screen people out based on the number of things they have there. We do look more critically at the quality. So sometimes people may have a large list of many things they've been involved in, but they've had very peripheral involvement. It doesn't mean quite as much as having maybe one strong either first author publication or a presentation at a conference. I view those myself both almost equally, right? If you've had the opportunity to complete a project and disseminate that knowledge in some way in a professional arena, whether it's a written publication or presentation at a major national conference, you should absolutely put that kind of stuff on there. You don't have to have a ton. You realistically aren't going to have time to do a lot of that because your primary goal should be getting through medical school in your curriculum, right? You don't want it to be that you're doing too many things and you're distracting yourself from your primary aim. But if you can commit to one or two projects and achieve that, that's great. If you can't, at least for me and for most anesthesiology programs. I would say outside of maybe the really big name research programs, but I think most of us, it's not that critical to have a certain number or even have a certain number of first author or publications. Um, it is important though to display the quality, and even if you're midway through a project at the time of application submission, I think it's reasonable to put down what you're working on, where you are so far, have you participated in some data analysis or IRB approval, and be able to talk about it in a very, kind of thorough way. Because expect that, it's often in these interviews, residency interviews, that people will ask you, hey, tell me a little bit about your research. I'm interested in that. So you want to know what you're talking about.
Wonderful. All right, next few questions are interview stage. So let's say they've gotten an interview. Can you talk a little bit about how research comes up in those interview conversations? And you've just alluded to that, I think, in terms of them being able to share real detail. What are some ways you've seen people really shine when they're talking about research? Or conversely, maybe times that it's actually worked against a candidate in your experience?
Yeah, I think, we don't, I wouldn't say we always ask about it, but sometimes there's a interesting aspect of their research on their CV, right? And one of the things, just as a kind of get to know you candidate question, we'll ask them, tell me about this project. It sounds really interesting, or that outcome, or what you learned from that. And probably, especially if it's an anesthesiology relevant kind of project, but any kind of project's up for grabs. Anything you put on your CV, you should expect is fair game to be asked about, and you want to be able to talk about it and sound like, you're being truthful, of course, and you're really committed to it. And you can talk spur of the moment about, a synthesis of what this was actually about. What was the purpose or the aim of your study? What is your hypothesis? What are your conclusions? Or what do where are you in the process if you haven't concluded the project? And people shine when they can answer those questions appropriately, right? Conversely, and pretty obviously, if we ask you these questions and you sound like you don't really know what it was about, it makes it sound like you're maybe buffering your CV a little bit generously, and maybe your involvement in that particular project wasn't exactly the way it was construed on your application. And that's a pretty negative thing, right? Because then you're it's kind of misconstrued, or you're perceived in a negative way, and you definitely don't want that. So you want to be truthful, but then make sure that you think a little bit about that before going into your interview so you're prepared to answer those questions.
These last few questions are kind of strategizing, getting in the weeds of choosing certain opportunities or over others, that kind of thing. So first, the big worry for first year medical students is, let's say I want to do anesthesia, but I can't find an anesthesia project right now. If I go do something in general surgery, will I be perceived later as a suboptimal candidate because I didn't do something in anesthesia? What you mentioned this earlier, but what do you recommend for those students that know what they want to pursue and they just don't have a project in that area in the
Mhm.
short?
I would say don't worry too much about that. Here at UK, anyway, we don't have a high volume of research within our department. There really are fairly limited opportunities. I mean, things come up, and certainly when things are going on, often many students are participating in data analysis and sharing the work on a study, right? But it's not uniform. It ebbs and flows year to year, and it just may not be there. There may not be a project at the time that you're looking for it. No worries. I look at it as me and my APDs, I said we look at it as the experience of researching, right? And it's really more about immersing yourself in the research process and learning what it takes to get an IRB approved, to work on a team, to get a project off the ground, and all the hurdles and conflicts you inevitably have to overcome, right? How do you analyze data? How do you apply a scientific or statistical method? Did you learn or appreciate something about the process? Even if it isn't your desire to be a world-class researcher in the future, it's still of value to have that experience as a student. So I would say if you have an opportunity in general surgery, internal medicine, whatever it is, and it's something you are actually at least somewhat interested in, then go for it. But don't feel like you have to bend over backwards to seek out those opportunities. The other thing I would say is sometimes, again, quality improvement projects in anesthesiology or another specialty as well might be more available and can be, I think, equally as valuable on your CV. Might be something that you have a timeline to actually complete as well. And many of those things can also be presented at major national conferences and posters as well. So those are good opportunities to look at.
I do sometimes hear students say, if I do bench work versus clinical versus med ed versus QI, will I be viewed differently? It sounds like as long as it's engaging and you're learning, you're not necessarily penalizing people for it being a different
Yeah.
category of research.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm certainly not. I think I don't need it to fall into a certain bucket, right? And there's not more value of one or the other. The value is in the learning and the experience and showing that, you show up, you complete the work, you're accountable. It's just another way, I think, another way to show your character, as I said at the beginning of the interview, and kind of shine that way. So use those opportunities to display those qualities.
Going back to showing your character, this is something that students really worry about. We coach a lot on how to not double dip, how to not actually red flag yourself by appearing to pad your CV or something. And it changes a
Mhm.
lot, specialty to specialty, project to project. Any broad advice in terms of times where you thought this looks like padding, or this is the point at which you're just trying to put more things, get more outcomes out of a project versus getting the most out of it? Any insight there on how you recommend students maximize outcomes without kind of
Mhm.
padding things?
Yeah, I would say I don't feel like I encounter that too often on people's CVs. There are a few people that give us a CV that they've done other specialties, other fellowships, they may have more extensive research, but I don't know that I'm, looking at it that critically or necessarily looking at it in that way or seeing that about padding. But I suppose it could arise. We can see the list of the titles and the things, and if you're submitting multiple of the same titles, then yeah, it looks kind of like you are padding. So my advice would be to put one project that you actually presented at, if you have a choice between a national and a regional conference and it was accepted to both and that was okay with those societies to have it accepted at both and presented at both, then you pick the one that probably has the bigger national audience to put on your application, right? I wouldn't duplicate it just to avoid showing, or someone reading into the potential of kind of double dipping. I will say that a lot, at least in anesthesiology, a lot of our conference submissions for these national societies, like the American Society of Anesthesiology, for example, have rules and regulations that say that you can't submit something here that you already got accepted or submitted or presented somewhere else. And I would venture to guess that many other specialty societies have similar rules. So when you are doing these things, talk with your faculty mentors and make sure you're doing everything appropriately and above board.
All right.
Yeah.
This is the fun part. We get to talk about the long term. Students often do research because they want to match and they want to be successful. But let's talk about residency and beyond. How do you see residents engaging in scholarship? Faculty, are y'all engaging with scholarship? What are kind of
Mhm.
ways in which they can also be building skills that they will actually use after medical school?
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely harder in residency to do a lot of research. And truthfully, your primary goal is the clinical training. So every residency is a little bit different, but some residencies in anesthesiology have more robust research rotations or outcomes or projects going on in their training. Sometimes they will extend out even a whole year of residency just so you can focus longitudinally on a project after or in between, working out all your clinical rotations and metrics. Realistically, to try to do something concurrently while you're learning all your clinical rotations is pretty hard to do. We here are just a 4-year program. We don't have any ever extra extensions necessarily for research, but we will offer some limited research elective time up to a few months. And that is, of course, contingent upon you having a project with a mentor with the IRB approval and then being given some time to do that. You still have probably some clinical weekend or call duties on that month, but you would be given some allotted time. But you have to have the project in the dedication and passion, but we do not require it in residency. And it's not part of a core requirement in anesthesiology residencies, according to the ACGME. So it would always be an elective thing as a resident. Faculty members engage variably. Our faculty are not particularly, highly productive in the research arena. We do have a vice chair of research for our department, who's Dr. Kevin Hatton. He's also high in the institutional leadership, so his role kind of straddles, but he oversees some projects, has a recent publication that's going to our American Society of Anesthesiology conference, and I know medical students have been involved with that. But that's kind of up or kind of comes up, not necessarily on a regular basis, but as projects come in and out. We have some statisticians that work within our department that are happy to help with the analysis of projects. They're happy to vet ideas. We have a QR code and a process for people to submit ideas. And we do have ways to support projects when people want to pursue something. So some of our faculty are a little bit more engaged than others, certain junior faculty, I would say.
Things to look forward to way in the future, students.
Yeah.
Dr. Pinault, anything else that you would have wanted to share or kind of advise for these upcoming students before we go?
I think your questions were tailored to, a pretty nice summary. I guess I would say, just to summarize this specifically with regards to your CV and research and QI, everything really should be more about quality over quantity, no matter what category you're putting things in. So I really want you to think about that. I want you to think about displaying your best self on paper, which can be a little bit tricky to do, and you do have to take some time to think about it, right? Think about the most valid experiences, the things you've done longitudinally, the things that matter to you. Choose projects because they matter. Because it can, if you're just doing things to pad your CV and you don't care about it, it's not interesting to you, it's going to come across that that's how you feel. And that's not how you want to be perceived, right? You want to be perceived that you invest in things that you care about because they matter to you and they're going to improve your skills or your future career aspirations or what have you, right? So just be genuine about it. You don't have to do a ton of things. First and foremost, be a good student. Pick a few things that you care about, stick with them, see them through to the end if you can. If you can get a publication or poster, great. If you can't, just work through it as far as you can get and display that. That matters way more than, the absolute quantity of anything.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Pinault. We really appreciate having you.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Looking forward to seeing you all in the future, hopefully,
That's
as you
right.
approach match.
That's right.